Hi, welcome back. This is Andrew Sears again, and this next section is on measuring cross-cultural effectiveness. And out of all the sections, if there's any one that you could do really well for your organization that's going to make a big difference, it would probably be this one. And part of the reason for that is really this quote from Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker is the most famous management guru, probably in the 20th century. And he said, what you don't measure, you can't improve. You could also say if you don't measure something that's not important to you. Now, we as Christians, we get there's a lot of things that can't be measured. But having said that, there are a lot of things that can. And if you're trying to measure cross-cultural effectiveness, then it's important to have some metrics on how you do that. So there's mechanisms for assessing cross-cultural effectiveness. Now, this is the basic structure of how I would say to develop a plan for assessing cross-cultural effectiveness. So what you want to do is, number one, you want to compile data on how the demographics of your board, your staff, your volunteers compare to those of clients. And the theory is that having a closer demographic match to clients will help improve outcomes. Then number two, and this is probably the most important one, is measure outcome disparities across key demographic variables. So if you have a demographic mismatch with clients and there's significant differences in outcomes across demographics, then the mismatch is likely a significant part of the reason. Now, I get that some differences will be from external factors, so it can be helpful to compare to industry averages. So if you have, a particular oppressed group, and this is just an example where the average person from this group may graduate from high school at a different educational level than the average person from a less oppressed group. You may have different college attainment rates, even if you're serving them both as effectively. But part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to make up for those differences. So ultimately what you want to do is you want to develop strategies to decrease the demographic mismatch and to better serve your clients and the outcome disparities. So step one is assessing your organizational demographics with a diversity data form. Now, this form is designed for the United States. So the United States is a very racialized country. So if you are in a different country, change the categories to fit your country. So, and it may not be racial categories. It might be ethnic group categories. It may be, if you're in a country that has a large foreign or international population, it may be those, migrants. And ultimately what this demographic form does is it looks at, who's your board, and then you're going to look at male, female, and what you should do is if you have the full data, then fill in the yellow squares. If you don't have the full data, do your best to estimate, because you might be in a very large organization. And the other thing is some of you may choose to do this just for your division if you're in a very large organization. So it's fine to do this for your division. And then you're going to do this for your management staff. And then you're going to do this for your program staff. And then you do it for volunteers. And then what you're really trying to do is you're trying to see what are the differences between your current the demographics of your staff and the current population served. Now, I get that demographics are only one factor, right? And the other thing is you may have a target population. So say you serve the homeless in your city, and you notice, you do some research, and you find out that the homeless in your city is half Black, 25% Latino, and 25% white. But you notice for your clients, it's actually 75% white. Well, that's pretty interesting data. Why is, why are your clients so much more white than the larger population that you're trying to serve? Now, in other cases, you may not be trying to serve the larger population. You might have a Black church, and you may be primarily trying to serve the Black community. So you're not going to be as concerned about that. But the target population is really who you're intending to serve. And the idea is you just want to write this down so that you know. Now, here are some of the problems that you'll encounter with cross-cultural effectiveness. So the success rate of program participants is much less for specific demographic groups. So a racial group or ethnic group or someone across social class, gender. So in some of the things you might measure are, if you're academic, it would be grades, graduation rate, job placement rate. If you're a recovery program, then you're going to look at program completion rates, your relapse rates, your job placement rates. And then you're going to see, are those the same across race? Are those the same, and you might have the same thing with people in your church. You might, assess how they're going through. And so if there's a, so that's one type of problem. The other type of problem is the one that I mentioned in just previously, where you may be somewhere, Texas, Florida, California, where your ministry has traditionally largely served a white community, but suddenly 3/4 of your target population is now Latino. And you do want to reach them, but you're not reaching them well. What I've found is often the most telling data. You may say, you know what, my outcomes are great, but the most significant thing is people just don't show up, or they almost never stay from particular demographic groups. So that data itself is really important. So you may say, I don't have poor outcome data for, say, the Latino population. I have a mismatch problem where 75% of the community that I'm trying to serve is Latino, but 5% are coming here, and whenever they come, they don't stay. So what that's showing is some sort of cross-cultural mismatch problem. So let me show you how we've done this with City Vision. I've talked about this in a different video, but I just want to give a highlight. So, we looked at student success across financial aid status, and the most important for us was Pell, because that is an indicator of being low income. And it was different, but it wasn't that different. And if you look at the industry averages, we're actually doing significantly best than industry average. Now, one of the things we had is we stopped taking student loans because we found that too many students were abusing loans. So student success by gender, very little difference across gender, and then student success across race. So both Asian and Hispanic, we had a small sample. Now for us, for our target population, we need to serve especially the Hispanic or Latino community better. And the fact that it's a small sample is probably the most significant part of the data. But the actual difference in outcome isn't significant. The Black completion rate difference is almost the same, and that's actually our most important outcome. The GPA difference is significant, and that's something that we're working to address. So now, if you look at now, one of the things you'll want to do, if possible, compare your outcome differences across race to industry averages. You might need to do some research for that. But for example, for us, there's really good data on schools. So, for those who were Black, what was their completion rate? So it was 28% compared to those who are white, so 47%. Our completion rates were almost exactly the same. Which would indicate that we're doing reasonably well cross-culturally, at least for completion. Latino, the completion rate is 35%. Now, why are these completion rates different? It's a combination of accumulated, systemic oppression, and a combination of organizations that just aren't designed to serve these groups as well. So now this is just more detail where we're exceeding. We created a spreadsheet that looked at this data. So this is one of the most important things that organizations can do, is have this spreadsheet. If you have an addiction recovery program, you should have a spreadsheet like this that says, how are you doing? You may be pleasantly surprised to find out you're doing better than you thought. So ultimately, the summary is, and this is to tie it back into the big picture. Now, cross-cultural strategy is only one part of an organization's overall strategy. And And if you only focus on cross-cultural strategy, then you may not serve your clients as well. One of the things, I've noticed is having lived in the Black community in Boston, a lot of Black families, they would like to have their kids go to a church or not a church, a school where there was a lot of Black teachers, but for them it was more important that they went to a good school that had adequate resources where there's effective teaching. So in the end, what you're trying to do is you're trying to achieve your mission. You're trying to serve your clients as effectively as possible. Your end goal isn't to your number one goal isn't to match their demographics. Your number one goal should be some sort of life change, right? And demographics are important. And the reason why we're emphasizing that is because of just the way cultural dominance work is cross-cultural strategy often gets undervalued. The best way to avoid devaluing cross-cultural strategy is to measure the organization's cross-cultural effectiveness. So some of the ways I just showed you. Organizations often don't want to track data because they know it may not be favorable. And, you hear the phrase, and if you work in cross-cultural circles, the phrase, I'm colorblind, that is not helpful. In cross-cultural circles, what that means is I see everyone as if they were white, and that's not going to be helpful. You are effectively organizationally colorblind if you're not tracking by demographics, and you can't improve what you don't measure. So the ultimate measure is how everything feeds into the mission. So as I mentioned, and ultimately, if you are in a severely under-resourced organization, then your goal may not be to try to improve your, cultural demographics of your staff. You might want to focus on getting resources. And ultimately, one of the biggest challenges is I found that, having staffing that reflects your community is expensive, because good staff of whatever racial group is going to be, is going to cost more. And, for groups that have been oppressed, often getting the top leaders, if you value their cultural competency a lot, there's a lot of organizations that will value their cultural competency that they bring. They're going to pay them more for their cultural competency, just in the same way that you would pay someone more for another competency. So if you're under-resourced, and right now the main issues that City Vision has in terms of our demographics is we just don't have adequate money because we need to grow as a school. We're still a young institution. So ultimately, that's what you need to sort out is, how does this fit into your overall strategy? So with that, hopefully this will be helpful as you go through this week's assignments.